Imagine having the power to save the entire world, but instead becoming the person everyone fears the most. Homelander isn't just another evil superhero. He's a psychological experiment gone horribly wrong. And that's what makes him so terrifying. Unlike most villains, he doesn't believe he's the bad guy. In his mind, everything he does is justified. But here's the real question. Was Homelander born evil, or did the world create him? Today, we're counting down the 7 biggest reasons Homelander became evil, starting with the smallest influence and ending with the one reason that changed everything. And trust me, once you hear number 1, you'll never look at Homelander the same way again. Let's start with the least obvious reason. Reason number 7, his powers made him lonely. Imagine being stronger than everyone you've ever met, faster than every athlete, smarter in combat than every soldier, completely bulletproof. At first, that sounds incredible, but after a while, you stop seeing people as equals. Homelander couldn't play like a normal child. He couldn't lose. He couldn't even experience danger. Every conversation became one-sided because no one could truly understand what it felt like to be him. That's the curse of being a god among humans. The more powerful he became, the more isolated he felt. And loneliness has a dangerous way of changing people. But loneliness alone doesn't create a monster. Something else slowly filled that emotional void. And that's where reason number 6 comes in. Reason number 6, he became addicted to being loved. Everyone wants to be liked. Homelander needed to be liked, and there's a huge difference. For most people, compliments are nice. But for Homelander, applause became oxygen. Every smile from a crowd, every cheer, every person chanting his name. It temporarily filled the emptiness inside him. But here's the problem with chasing validation. It's never enough. The moment the applause stopped, the insecurity came rushing back. That's why Homelander constantly watched the public's opinion of him. He wasn't just protecting his image. He was protecting his identity. Because deep down, if people stopped loving him, he was terrified they would realize he wasn't the perfect hero he pretended to be. That's also why criticism hit him so much harder than it hit everyone else. A normal person might get angry after being insulted. Homelander saw it as something much bigger. A threat to the only thing that made him feel valued. Every drop in popularity, every insult, every challenge to his reputation felt personal. Over time, he stopped asking, "How do I become a better hero?" and started asking, "How do I make people worship me again?" That's when admiration slowly turned into obsession. And when people refused to give him the love he craved, he began to believe they deserved to fear him instead, because if he couldn't be loved, he would make sure he was never ignored. But even this obsession with approval wasn't the root of the problem, because before Homelander ever stepped in front of a cheering crowd, someone else had already decided exactly who he was supposed to become. Reason number 5, Vought never raised a hero. They built a product. Every superhero has an origin story. Batman had Alfred. Superman had the Kents. Spider-Man had Uncle Ben. Homelander had a corporation. Before he was ever introduced to the world, Vought had already decided what he would wear, how he would smile, what he would say, and who he was allowed to be. They didn't see a child. They saw their greatest investment. Every interview, every photo shoot, every heroic rescue, every speech. It was all carefully designed to sell one thing, the perfect superhero. But there's a problem with pretending to be perfect. Eventually, you stop knowing who you really are. Homelander spent his entire life playing a role that someone else wrote for him. He wasn't allowed to make mistakes. He wasn't allowed to show weakness. He wasn't even allowed to be human. So instead of learning how to process fear, or guilt, or sadness, he learned how to hide them. And emotions that are buried don't disappear. They grow. Every lie he told to protect the image, every emotion he bottled up, every fake smile he forced, added more pressure inside him until one day, the mask started to crack. And when it finally did, the real Homelander was far more dangerous than the hero Vought had spent years trying to sell. But even Vought couldn't control one thing, because behind the cameras, behind the patriotic speeches, there was a little boy who had never experienced the one thing every child needs: a family. Reason number 4, he never learned empathy. Think back to the moment you first learned that your actions could hurt someone else. Maybe you broke a friend's toy. Maybe you made someone cry. Chances are, an adult sat you down and taught you something simple. Think about how they feel. That's how empathy is built. It isn't something we're born with fully developed. It's something we're taught. But Homelander never had anyone to teach him that lesson. Instead, he grew up in a place where people weren't people. They were scientists, security guards, employees. Everyone around him either feared him or wanted something from him. No one truly cared enough to teach him compassion. So instead of seeing human beings as individuals with fears, dreams, and families, he started seeing them as objects, obstacles, tools, or an audience. That's why Homelander can switch from smiling at a crowd to taking a life moments later without showing genuine remorse. To him, people aren't equals, they're fragile. Replaceable, almost like ants beneath his feet. And when you stop seeing people as human, hurting them becomes frighteningly easy. But even a lack of empathy doesn't fully explain why Homelander became so cruel. Because there was one thing he wanted more than power, more than fame, more than control. He wanted something every child deserves, to be loved. Reason number 3, he never experienced a real family. Every child enters the world needing the same thing. Not money, not fame, not power, love, real unconditional love. The kind that says, even when you mess up, I'm still here. Homelander never heard those words. He never had a mother who tucked him into bed. Never had a father who taught him right from wrong. Never had family dinners, birthday parties, or someone who hugged him simply because they loved him. Instead, he grew up surrounded by cold walls, bright laboratory lights, and people wearing lab coats. The closest thing he had to parents were scientists running experiments. Imagine growing up your entire life without knowing what genuine affection feels like. If every smile you've ever received was part of a test, how would you ever learn to trust anyone? That's why, as an adult, Homelander desperately searched for love in all the wrong places. He wasn't looking for relationships. He was looking for the childhood he never had. Every compliment, every ounce of attention, every person who admired him was an attempt to fill a hole that had been there since the day he was born. But there's a cruel truth about emotional wounds. You can't fill them with fame. You can't fill them with fear. And you definitely can't fill them with power. Without a real family to teach him compassion, forgiveness, and unconditional love, Homelander grew into a man who knew how to control people, but never how to connect with them. But as heartbreaking as that is, countless people have difficult childhoods and don't become monsters. So what pushed Homelander past the point of no return? The answer lies in something almost no one on Earth has ever experienced. What happens when a person has unlimited power, and no one can stop them? Reason number 2, absolute power destroyed his sense of right and wrong. There's an old saying, power corrupts, but Homelander proves something even more frightening. Absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it convinces you that you're always right. From the moment he was old enough to understand his abilities, there was almost no one on Earth who could stop him. No police officer, no army, no government, no prison. And when there's no real consequence for your actions, your moral compass begins to disappear. Most of us learn right from wrong because our choices have consequences. But Homelander lived in a completely different reality. Every time he crossed a line, someone covered it up. Every mistake was cleaned up by Vought. Every scandal was buried. Every disaster was turned into a PR campaign. Instead of hearing, "You can't do that," he kept hearing, "We'll take care of it." Slowly, Homelander stopped seeing himself as a man who had to follow rules. He started seeing himself as the one who made the rules, and once someone believes they're above everyone else, it becomes terrifyingly easy to justify anything. To Homelander, if he wanted something, he deserved it. If someone stood in his way, they were the problem. And if innocent people got hurt along the way, that was simply the price of protecting his vision of the world. But here's the twist. Even unlimited power wasn't the first domino to fall. Strip away the cape, strip away the fame, strip away the lasers and the applause, and you'll find the one reason that explains everything. Reason number 1, Homelander was never allowed to become human. Throughout this video, we've talked about loneliness, power, fame, Vought, his desperate need for love, and the family he never had. But none of those are the real answer. They all point to something much bigger. Homelander was never given the chance to become human. Think about every child you've ever met. They fall over, they cry, they make mistakes, they get comforted, they learn empathy, they learn kindness, they learn that other people matter. That's how a human being is built. Homelander skipped almost every one of those steps before he could even understand the world. He was turned into an experiment before he learned who he was. Vought told him who he had to be before he experienced unconditional love. He was taught that affection had to be earned before he could make friends. People feared him before he could fail. He became the most powerful person on Earth, piece by piece. Every opportunity to develop into a normal person was taken away from him. That's what makes Homelander different from most villains. He wasn't simply a good man who made bad choices. He was raised in an environment that rewarded his worst instincts while starving his best ones. None of this excuses the horrific things he's done. Those choices are still his. But understanding why someone becomes a monster isn't the same as saying they aren't responsible. And that's what makes Homelander such an unforgettable character. He's terrifying, not because he's the strongest superhero, but because he's a reminder of what can happen when immense power is placed into the hands of someone who was never taught how to be human. So, was Homelander born evil? I don't think so. I think he was born with the potential to become either the world's greatest hero or its greatest monster. Unfortunately, every person who raised him pushed him toward the second option. That's what makes The Boys so brilliant. It doesn't just ask, what if Superman was evil? It asks a much more disturbing question. What if we created him that way? And maybe that's the scariest part of Homelander, because monsters aren't always born. Sometimes they're made. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to see more deep dives into the psychology of characters, subscribe and let me know in the comments who I should analyze next. Thanks for watching.